from the Idiot Box, where we explore the good, the bad, and the wacky in television. I'm Allison Lips. Today, Steve Newvine joins us again. We're going to be talking about directed by James Burrows, which covers James Burrows' historic career. But first, Steve, how have you been? I heard that you won an award for your book, Jack and Johnny.
Thank you. I've been fine. Thank you for asking. And yes, I did recently get word from the book Jack and Johnny, the book I wrote about the friendship between Jack Benny and Johnny Carson, was just named one of the nonfiction winners from an organization known as the Royal Summit, or excuse me, Regal Summit Book Awards. And there are several organizations that evaluate books and you submit for consideration. And so yeah, it's just nice little plum to say, okay, well somebody else thinks it's worth worth their time and effort. So I'm proud of that, and
Congratulations.
yes, thank you very much. It's nice to have that, and it helps propel me further in some of my other projects that I'm working
Cool.
on.
And this is another book you recommended to me, the directed by James Burrows, 5 decades of stories from the legendary director of Taxi, Cheers, Frasier, Friends, Will and Grace, and more. I don't know how much more you need. That's already pretty impressive.
Pretty remarkable career. I think anybody in the entertainment industry, television entertainment industry, if they had one hit,
Yeah.
that would say, "Wow, this is my work." But to be able to repeat that success and to kind of add to what he has to offer, you can look at Cheers as sort of his efforts at collaborating with other creators and creating this
Yes.
Frasier
He,
followed up, and then some of his other projects where he is really developing the show and seeing it through everything right down to directing the episodes. Yeah,
yes.
pretty.
Cheers was probably his biggest, that and Will and Grace, because in terms of involvement he had, because Cheers, he worked with Glenn and Les Charles, and they helped develop the show. Burroughs is not a writer, but he is a very hands on director when it comes to setting up shots. People call him in to direct pilots because he gets shows on their feet. He has also directed tons of pilots that we've never heard of because they get shown to the network and the network's like, nope, we're not going any further with this. In terms of shows that we have heard of, Cheers is the most him because he was from the beginning in terms of not writing, but directing, shaping the sets, the design. He's very he's a big proponent of making sure that the comedy works on multiple levels. So, yes, there's a visual element, but he talks about how he'll go behind the set and listen to the voices because he grew up with radio. So if the tone and you're just relying on visuals, it's not going to work for the person who's half watching the show.
Right. He it also That's a good point to talk how he goes behind the set or just wants to listen to it and not
Yeah.
necessarily see it. Um, and his dad, he has a couple chapters about his dad,
Yes, Abe
Abe Burrows.
Burrows.
I remember watching Abe Burrows on reruns of a 50s game show called The Name's the Same.
Oh,
And it was
yes.
sort of to tell the truth, I've got a secret blend.
Yes,
Uh,
it went through so many hosts.
right.
Bob and Ray,
Yeah.
Robert Q. Lewis. I forget who the original host was. I know Jerry Lester was frequently a panelist.
Yeah.
So was
And
Paul Reiner.
early, you see Bill Cullen was a panelist on there for a while, and Gene
Yes.
Rayburn, and uh, but Abe was sort of kind of the comical, kind of goofy, looking things kind of in a tilted manner kind of panelist, and
Now it's dawning on me he's the other one with and Meredith Wilson were the first time I saw it, I'm like, who are these people? Because
Yes.
they're not well known anymore. Meredith Wilson, when I Googled him, it's like, oh, the Music Man.
Yeah.
I've never seen the Music Man, but I'm well
Oh,
versed enough in musicals to know it's a well known musical.
oh, sure. And in Meredith Wilson was the music director or orchestra leader slash Phil Harris type for the old Burns and Allen show. You know, he would
Okay.
direct that orchestra and banter with George and Gracie as part of the show. But Abe, Abe had that kind of looking at things askew kind of approach. I saw him in the early 70s on the new version of the Match Game, the Hollywood version.
Mm-hmm.
That actually what we see now in prime time, but the old Gene Rayburn Match Game 73 or
Yeah,
74,
that's
whatever.
so weird that you brought it up because I was watching an episode this morning and I haven't seen it since I was a teenager. And now watching it, I'm like, wow, like the answers can get way dirtier than what I was thinking. And now, if I was watching Match Game, they would say exactly those answers. But trying to figure out, like, what's the clean 1970s version of what I'm thinking?
And that's a podcast too. Just if we could get Dick Bartolo to do this podcast, I'm sure he was one of the question writers. In fact, he was the guy who Match Game, of course, aired in the '60s.
Yes.
The daytime
Completely
show.
different show, even though the general concept was the same.
The network decided, okay, show's over. You'll be on for another 4 or 5 weeks, but we're canceling the show. And I think the legend is that Tolo uh, convinced Mark Goodson, hey, let's play around with some of these questions. Give me a little leeway here. And since we're going off the air anyway, they can't
Right.
fire us. And that's where apparently, and I saw any of those later episodes where they tried some of those innuendo type
Mm-hmm.
questions when the show was reworked a few years later. Dick was one of the writers and would submit. And he's an East Coast guy. He would just send things over. Either I don't know
Yeah.
they were
And
using back.
that is how Dumb Donald got his nose caught in a lot of things.
Yes, yes. Had they all those various characters that those writers would create. That was it was something. Um, but anyway, we went down that rabbit hole because of Abe Burrows,
Yes,
I like to think that your parents certainly have an influence on the kind of work you choose and your
absolutely.
approach to work. And I got that sense from this book that Abe Burrows played a very important part in Jim's development as a creator, and then some of his early jobs
Yeah.
were because of that relationship. He was, Abe apparently directed the Broadway show of Breakfast at Tiffany's, and Jim worked for him. I guess he was a second assistant stage manager. My understanding, you have a stage manager for the front of the stage and a stage manager for the back of the stage.
Yes.
And he kind of started there, and then from there moved on and made the trip out west, like so many of them do, and
Yes.
just toiled around in wherever he could get an opportunity and make it work. So
It,
fascinating
it is.
career.
He's all James Burrows is also very clear in the book that yes, he had a leg up, but he wouldn't have been able to continue his career if one, he wasn't good and people didn't like him. Two, it wasn't a guarantee that his career would have turned out the way it did. He did the work. He also got tired of theater and was like, let me write to Tinker at Mary Tyler Moore, um, the production company, MTM, and see if they could use a theater director like me, and got a response back like, absolutely, like, come on out. We could use you. We'll train you. And he was an apprentice essentially on these shows, learning the ropes before he started directing the Mary Tyler Moore Show, the Bob Newhart Show, and all of those classics at the time.
You can just imagine what that creative environment must have been like, because Mary Tyler Moore was such a different kind of show for the time. And then to
Yes.
follow that, I believe the next year with the Bob Newhart Show, and that was a different kind of sitcom.
Yeah.
And just see, I love, there's just a little juxtaposition in the book about how Petticoat Junction aired one week, and the next week the Mary Tyler Moore Show debuted in that same time slot. And to think you went from, you know, Petticoat Junction to, Mary Tyler Moore, and that whole, groundswell shift in how we were going to be viewing sitcoms from that moment forward.
Yeah, and even as a TV historian, because I didn't live through it, I sometimes lose track of the fact that that was a huge shift. Yes, I teach and I studied Petticoat Junction, Green Acres, and those type of shows. But then it's like, yeah, but then you were watching Mary Tyler Moore the next week. And we don't get that anymore because it's like, well, this is all history now. And we don't, even if we give context, your brain doesn't necessarily process it as, oh, this is weird. It's just all ancient.
Sure. And as an audience, you just, that was an era too where you only had the three networks, and whatever was on, that those were your choices. uh, Unlike today with all kinds of delivery mechanisms for shows, and all the various channels if you decide to stay with pure television. But for an audience that was, just brought up on Green Acres and Beverly Hillbillies and Petticoat Junction,
Right.
and then the next week, Mary Tyler Moore, and the next year, Mary Tyler Moore and Bob Newhart. And I was in college during that incredible year where you had that solid gold lineup on Saturday nights, All in the Family.
Yeah.
I forget what followed that, but then you had Mary Tyler Moore, Bob Newhart, and Carol Burnett Show. And for a Saturday night college guy, you'd think I'd be in a different place, but a lot
Yeah,
of
where
us,
are your dates?
and watched a lot of those shows. Certainly the Bob Newhart Show, and I believe that was the same year Dick Van Dyke was a regular on Carol Burnett. There was just a
Oh,
series of steps. I think Harvey Korman had left the series. They needed somebody with real power, and Dick Van Dyke apparently was willing to do it, just to see how it goes. He never really meshed well with the routine of the writers and the rehearsals and all that. But he stayed for the year and walked out the front door, and they all loved him and everything. But it was he was part of the show, and I thought it was some of his best work, as a regular on the Carol Burnett Show.
right.
But it was an outstanding era in television, and to think that it was just a matter, it was just really that decision by the network a year before, that we're going to purge some of these rural type
Yep, the
shows
rural purge.
other direction, and it worked. As much as it just really messed with us, those of us who love those
Right, because
shows.
those shows were extremely successful, and CBS was like, we're getting the wrong viewers. These are not what the advertisers want to see. So they went with more upscale, sophisticated stuff. It's the whole, we were getting the rural farmers, but we want the city people.
Yes, I've been reading earlier this summer, reading the a biography of William Paley, and
Oh, which one?
I forget the title now, but it was in part of a compilation that I bought at a at a secondhand store. But very well done. I can look up my notes and give you the author and all that. We
The
may end up
one
doing.
that I read was Empire. I do have another one that I haven't read yet, though.
Yeah, I don't believe it was called Empire, and I should have my book journal here. I could tell you exactly the
Okay.
one. but there is a chapter in there about the rural purge, and essentially Paley was, he was all about making money for the network, and he while he had his favorites, he certainly understood the need to make that shift if it had to happen. Of course, he had already kind of saved his favorite or his wife's favorite, Gunsmoke, a few years prior, and kept that on the air for another 4 or 5 years. But
Yes.
he was instrumental in keeping that and recognizing that yeah, we sometimes have to make some tough decisions that a lot of people may not like, but and we may suffer a little from it initially, but
Hmm.
long term probably in our best interests. And they made that shift and never looked back really.
And that is why Bill Paley stayed around until the 70s, I believe. Like, he was at CBS for a very long time. He kept retiring, unretiring, kind of like how Bob Iger does now.
Yeah, I guess that might be a close second to, yeah, Paley, was sort of one of those guys who didn't really want to leave, and yeah, he would retire and
Right.
come back. And I guess even at the end, while he had a prestigious, the way I understand it from reading this book, he had a prestigious title and all that, but he was more or less a figurehead, come in and
Yes.
do all that. But I'm sure Empire will be as good an experience reading as whatever the book was that I read. But it's very interesting how one person, uh, just at CBS, he had his
Right.
and he
I
built it up, from one brick at a time, basically, from
I will say Empire is a very good book, but it's very detailed. And if you just want like a brief introduction to him, this is not the book to read. It gets very detailed and like you have to be a hardcore like TV lover to fully get into it. And like my area specifically is the business side of television, more so than the creative side. So this was right up my alley. Obviously, you
yes,
can't have one
yes,
without the other, but I'm more like I can name all the network executives rather than I can name who like all the writers on the 1961 season of The Tonight Show. Whereas there are people who can do that.
yes, they are. And I'm unfortunately you're not talking to one of them. Good, good tell you. But I had a note here from the Burroughs book about Burroughs watching Grant Tinker as Grant
Yes.
Tinker watched an episode being filmed of Mary Tyler Moore, and
Mhm.
how his observation of that, he was just so positive, so encouraging, and he really did serve as an advocate for creators, and
Mhm.
he did have an amazing impact on popular television as we know it during those years. And I think about Grant Tinker and how he was part of the shift with NBC from the seller of the ratings to slowly bring it back out and do it in a
Yes.
way that you could be proud of some of the shows that were created during that period of time, early 1980s, maybe late 70s. I'm thinking, of course, starting with Hill Street Blues, but
Right.
you
This
go
is
on
also
with
the time of Fred Silverman, for context.
right, getting, once Silverman was out and Grant Tinker was and yeah, it might have been the temptation might have been there to just like, okay, what will get us the big numbers in a fast way, and he didn't go that way. He decided, we're going to try to focus on quality, and and a lot of good shows didn't make it. And I remember just like, yeah, I really like that show, and but the ones that stayed, and then other newer shows would come along, and really amazing. So I
Yeah.
think again, he saw in Grant Tinker a sort of someone he could emulate as far as keeping the focus on the quality, and
Yes.
not necessarily sell out for the cheap laughs. And
And this was
he Oh no, go ahead. Go
No,
ahead.
you can continue because it but you were I was changing the subject. It sounded like you were going along the same line of thought.
Well, I just had another note here about you know, I wrote down here MTM legacy, like
Yes.
City writing room, writer's room, and that idea that it was so collaborative and yeah, there's somebody who's in charge and making sure we get the show on the air and all of that, but at the same time, they were allowed the writers and the creative team to really, you know, try anything and
Right. And
so
Burroughs admits he's not a writer, but he is the guy who can make the writer's joke the funniest it could possibly be, or let them know, like, hey, this is not your best material. Can you come up with something better so we can make it work?
right, right. So,
So, which is a very good skill to have. He kept the peace on many programs that could have been potential issues. Where I was going, because we were talking about how Grant Tinker was an influence, I was going towards more to the end of the book where he mentions Norman Lear
yeah.
and directing live in front of a studio audience because Norman Lear only wanted Jim Burrows to do it. And because of Burrows' background in theater, he was the perfect guy to do it since he came from the theater world, but he has a decades long career in sitcoms. So he could merge the two together and understand I need this shot, but it's live and the actors will need to move in a certain way.
Mhm. I think that was sort of the beginning too of you've heard stories of people who've been in audiences for these shows
Yes.
and just his shows, but others as well. And it's not at times not the most pleasing experience because you're
No.
there several hours, they're shooting, reshooting
Yes.
things, doing angles, but so there's that trade-off. Okay, you want the live audience, but we're really gonna wear them down if we uh, you know
Mhm.
want to get this right. And yeah, I can appreciate that, but I think there's a part of Burroughs is sort of like each show is an opening night on Broadway. You do it. Yeah, there were some mistakes, and we'll fix that, and then we'll do it again tomorrow night, and we'll just keep going. He was
Yes.
certainly a perfectionist in that he did reshoot and get what he needed for the shows, but at the same time, I think once a theater guy, always a theater guy, and that's how
Yes.
I him anyway from what we've been reading about him.
Definitely. He also learned, I think it was from Tinker, the importance of cover shots
Hmm.
where
Yeah, I just
um
remember a broadcast professor at Syracuse University telling us, "When troubles hover, go for a cover." You're just like always have a cover shot so that if something's going wrong, you can cut to that. Probably talking about a live broadcast kind of thing, but yes, you need to have those shots, and it's fun as a viewer, especially a viewer that may be a little more savvy about how things are put together. When you see a shot that just like where did that come from? Well, you kind of know there was an edit done or something happened. They had to fix it, and they
right,
did.
it's supposed to be a close up there, but it's a long shot, so we just see
Yeah,
like the character's mouth open from a distance.
yeah, yeah. It was interesting. I mean, the thing that I got the book mainly for the stuff about Cheers and Frasier, and I just thought some of my favorite episodes of both those shows were the ones that looked like plays. I mean, where I'm thinking of the one in the second half of Cheers with the Rebecca character, and
Mhm.
they were doing some fancy event, and you were seeing these doors that go both ways, and one character would walk in, another character would walk through, and it just reminded me so much of a Broadway play that they're
Yes.
just. And on Frasier, there would be an occasional episode that kind of had that feel and look. And he would probably argue that they were all treated like they were they were plays,
Well, the live Will and Grace episodes were too.
Yeah, yeah,
He talks about having to choreograph the scene where they're basically fighting with each other in a bathroom, and like the part of the scene I remember is like Will gets baby powder all over his face and everyone ends up a mess, and then they had to reshoot it for the West Coast show because it was live.
yeah. Pretty amazing stuff. And he also kind of touched on, I don't want to keep jumping around, but he touched on, um, you know, his view that at the time that a reboot of Cheers would never work, and why, and how, not only have you lost some key characters, but it's just, that show essentially could only work for that period of time, and you've never seen a reboot. Of course, I'm sure if Ted Danson decided he wanted to do it, something would happen. But and yet we have seen, and he, I don't know if it's in here or not, but I know he was sort of proven right with the Frasier reboot. I mean, it only lasted 2 seasons, and I remember seeing, I think, one or two episodes. I liked it, the
Yeah.
reboot, but I guess it just didn't translate to must view television.
I don't think it did. I liked it because I I'm like, I know people like the Alan character because
Yeah,
I've been in academia for so long. I've been among professors and have worked with them. And I would talk to my mom about it. She only watched a few episodes and she's like, I hate him. He's the dumbest character I have ever seen. And I'm like, well, there are real people who just show up to class to collect their paycheck and do not bother teaching their students. They exist.
yeah. Yeah, I had a little taste of that. I was an adjunct professor for a few years at State University College in New York, and so I would just come in, on the day of my class. I think I had to do my office hour, an hour before my class, so
Mhm.
I could at least have students could have access to me. But at the same time, I just was in and out and do that. But I remember seeing some of the teachers and wondering, yeah, really, you know, you,
Coasting on tenure.
how long have you been getting away with this kind of thing? And there were others who were just excellent, and
Yes.
just so and it's probably we could
It
find
is
that
a
in.
spectrum, but the good ones are excellent, and the bad ones, you're just like, uh,
I remember, and I'm sure you've had this where you evaluate the instructor,
yes.
and some universities will publish the results or whatever, and and I was evaluated even as an adjunct, just
Yeah,
one or
I
two,
was too.
and I remember my ratings were kind of in the middle, which I bothered me a little because I thought I was really connecting with a lot of folks, and I read some of the verbatims, and some were like, this guy just, he's remarkable. Mr. Newvine's one of the best. You know, I was teaching broadcast writing, so one of the best broadcasters I've ever encountered. He's the greatest thing, and in the same list, like, this man does not belong in a classroom. So
Yes.
okay, well,
I
hopefully
wonder
the
how that corresponds to their final grades.
Yeah, in fact, one year I remember, I, for whatever reason, I did not get evaluated. They didn't give me the material to pass out, or I forget how it was
Hmm.
done. And but I wanted to know. So I had a guest speaker come in, and I knew this guy. He was a friend of mine, professional associate as well. And I said, "Listen, he's going to talk for you know half an hour. Um, but before he talks, I'm going to leave the room for 10 minutes, and he's going to take care of the survey. And he has assured me that I won't see the results until after the grades have been posted. He promised me that, and I promise you to the students that I won't look at them. But I said I really need the feedback.
Yeah.
And so we did that. I left the room and I was out in the hallway, and apparently the first thing he said was, I promise you, he will not see these results until after your grades have been posted. They did the survey, a month or so after the semester ended. I get a manila envelope and there are all the surveys that have come in. So I had a chance to, you know, get a feel for what it was, how that particular class worked for me, and if I reached them and all that. So very important part of the whole teaching experience is to see, am I really making any sense here? Because
Yeah.
doing some of my early classes, I wondered. I said, man, I'm glad I didn't decide to do this as a full-time career. But as I worked through, other classes, and I was always called back, is they called me at the beginning of the semester, and we got, an overbooked session of,
You're
broadcast writing. Can you pick that up for us, or whatever? And that's how I would, keep going.
yeah,
But it was fun.
I only did it one semester because the academic landscape has changed, so there are fewer adjuncts being used. And what I received was they everything's done virtually. I received out of a class of like 25 people, I received maybe feedback from 5, but I only got their ratings on a scale from 1 to 5. I didn't get the comment anonymized. So all I had to go off of was like, oh yeah, this professor was really clear, or I didn't understand what this professor was saying. And you usually get the extremes. So it's like everything averages out to a 3. Like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is not helpful.
No, it's not. It's not. And I think that may be one of the reasons too why I wanted to do my own, just because, yeah, I didn't really have a lot of regard for the system that they used, and plus they, for whatever reason, I couldn't administer their version of it. So, well, anyway, back to the book.
Yes.
I love this conversation because we have something to talk about throughout. Um, I got a note here on the Frasier years. Probably Frasier is one of my favorite shows of all time.
Okay.
And I remember how he writes about how he looked at Frasier as an entirely new series. Um, that
Yes.
Kelsey Grammer would be the new Sam Malone. He would be the go-to guy in
Right.
every episode.
And Niles is replacing Frasier.
Right. And then, yeah, in fact, even Frasier's character in Cheers
Hmm.
was kind of a whack job kind of guy. And here he had to shift that. He had those characteristics in his personality, but he was not as nutty, I think his term, not mine, not as nutty as he
Yeah.
was Cheers. Um,
Because
and
you center a show around someone who's completely out of their mind.
right, right.
His theory is to give the center something to work with, and then the outer characters are the ones that can go off into their own world.
There's that. Yeah. Yeah, and he made that observation that he kind of saw Frasier almost like a George Bailey character, where he sees the ultimate good in everything,
Hmm.
and even though it, getting around to that is always a challenge and part of the tension that created the show. And I'm actually writing about It's a Wonderful Life right now, and so it's kind of nice to see that that's still that's still out there, drifts around in pop culture. The George Bailey and It's a Wonderful Life and all that. But I thought his
Yeah.
observations of working on Cheers was really telling and at a perfect point in his career too, after coming off on the success of Cheers and what do we do next
Yeah.
and just a quick observation to it in the introduction he talks about working with the Charles brothers and how they had this long contract that they were going to sign and they
Yes.
everyone kind of looked at it, tossed the paper aside, shook hands, and that was their relationship, which is kind of nice to see that. I don't know if that still is maintained that way, but
I
that's
don't
how it.
think so. Yeah, that was really cool. He outright said, like, I'm like we the three of us, like I'm like the third Charles brother,
Yeah, yeah.
which is extremely cool. I don't know if I would have been comfortable with a handshake on a
No,
big contract like that, but it worked for them, and they
well,
had a
you hear
very successful collaboration.
yes, yes. You hear that. I know Frankie Valli's told the story of how he and who was the who wrote all the songs, Bob Gaudio, yeah, that they have a handshake deal, and that you know, and maybe that was the case, and maybe that still is the case, but I think it probably has been finessed in some way with some attorneys billing some fees for a contract that is satisfactory to both sides. Yeah,
And after Frasier, Jim Burrows did the Will and Grace, and then a few years back we had the revival of Will and Grace, and he's way more generous to that revival or the reboot or whatever you want to call it than I am. I watched all of it and I'm like, the original is very of its time. The original definitely succeeded in what it wanted to do in terms of making the LGBTQ community more visible and showing their humanity. But the revival, I felt, was just way too focused on making political points and got away from these are just people living their lives. They have the same trials and tribulations as straight people do, and they're just looking for love and want to hang out with their friends. And that's not what I got out of the revival.
yeah, and I'm not sure whether I've seen any of the episodes from the revival because I'm not into streaming. I'm an old.
That actually aired on NBC. It
Yeah, really.
wasn't a Frasier situation.
Well, I guess I just didn't watch it.
You
But
might have just been like, I do not want to watch a show that started as a Hillary Clinton commercial.
well,
Regardless of your politics, that's a weird way to start a show.
there's some truth in that. If indeed that, like as you described, they were making some political points. I think, and we've seen this with what's happening in the late night space right now. It's like finally this stuff is catching up that we want to be entertained. We
Right.
don't be an advocate for one party or the other. We just want to be entertained. And if that's indeed what how you felt about the reboot, I could certainly see how that would happen, and
I'm
especially in that.
someone, and I like The Daily Show. So it's like, okay, if you're too far for me.
Yeah,
But The
yeah,
Daily Show, you know what you're getting. If I'm watching a sitcom, I'm watching how these characters react. I
right.
don't need you to have a random insult to whatever politician we're making fun of today.
And I could think of other failed reboots. Murphy Brown's a good example. It's just
Yeah.
okay. We're just not.
Murphy Brown was also of its time. I think Murphy Brown had the potential to work better simply because the original took on um, Dan Quayle and other things. But again, you have to be careful and it's so fragmented politically where you can't just decide this is the audience I'm going for because there is no shades of gray or purple in the middle anymore. Or so it seems. Like they're there, but those aren't the loudest people are the minorities on the ends.
Did you see Greg Gutfeld's appearance on uh, the
No.
Tonight Show? Um, Somebody just wrote about it this week. We saw it, my wife and I, and it was great. It was a great appearance, and this writer on one of the online media sites did an article that was posted this week and said it was very good on a number of reasons. One of which is that Gutfeld knew what it takes to be a good guest. He had his stories, and he had his quick comebacks to quest and uh, Jimmy, he knew when you have a guest that's really killing to stand back and let it happen. And he just fed him an occasional line here and there. There's nothing political about it. It was just it told this hilarious story about first meeting each other at a party, many years ago, long before Gutfeld was famous, and just it just very very funny. And they promoted his
Mhm.
reality show, his game show that is airing on Fox Nation. And
Oh, I didn't
so
know he had a game show on Fox Nation.
it's an interesting concept. I haven't seen it because I don't stream, but the concept is they started with five. One of them had to leave, but they had four contestants who um, have been in enforced news blackout. I guess they're in a house
Mhm.
beginning the inauguration. So for like 90 days, they had no news. And then the game part of it is they are being asked questions: did this really happen or didn't it? Is it true or is it false? And apparently, the concept, where, like I say, started with five. One of them, couldn't say. And even Gutfeld made a comment about the show that said, I think the top prize is like $25,000. And, we had these people tied up for like 3 months. It's like, was it really worth it for that? But, it was just getting big laughs. But it was a very good appearance. And
I'm
it
not
kind
sure how I feel about Fox doing that concept though.
Well, I think it was, I haven't, like I say, I haven't seen the show, but
Yeah.
apparently it's streaming right now on Fox Nation, which is one of their
Yeah, that's their
services.
streaming service.
And but the appearance was, very good, and I think it worked on many levels. I think, the Tonight Show audience certainly was exposed to a new group of viewers because I'm sure a lot of Gutfeld viewers were tuning in to see how it would go. and
Yes.
and I think there is some credibility about being on the long established Tonight Show franchise that's been there for 70 years, and to be part of that. So it was very good. But we digress.
Yes,
Or
we
maybe,
did. But
you know, we I don't know if we mentioned news radio, um, but he did talk about, this was that news radio marked his shift into developing shows that he was directing. And
I don't remember him mentioning news radio.
very brief mention. It's around page 275 if you want to go back to it later on. But
Yeah,
um,
that I okay.
with
I mean, that's one of my favorite shows, so I'm like, "Wait, did I just sleep on something?"
Well, I don't think I think there's a whole chapter, I think, on other shows that he's done. He just also mentioned something I didn't know, but that the Joe Rogan character, they actually um, were were going to cast Ray Romano, and it just didn't
Oh,
work or whatever.
yes, remember that now. I may not have put two and two
Yeah,
together because I already knew that
yeah.
fact.
And then he mentions George and Leo, which was Bob Newhart's
Yes.
series with Judd Hirsch. And he said what made that unique for him was that Bob's character was a crazy one for a change. It's usually, he was the one reacting to all the craziness, but he was more. And I don't remember much about George and Leo other than they did one episode where they basically took as many of the regulars from the previous series who were available and just crammed them all into one episode. And it was just kind of a cab driver might be, Tom Poston or whoever, and just all of the shows, Newhart, the Bob Newhart Show. It was like have them all there, and
I was
you,
able to track it down. I haven't seen an episode yet, but I do know I can send you a link if you want.
it was one of those shows. One of those shows. I watched it because of Bob Newhart, and
Yes.
certainly Judd Hirsch added to it as well. But I wasn't surprised that. And it may have made it more than one season too, but I just
Believe it made it to 2 seasons, but barely 2 seasons. I really, don't know why they thought making Bob Newhart the crazy character would work, because I don't that's not his persona at all, like, even with like, his best friend was Don Rickles. Like, it's the contrast, whereas Don Rickles, totally that guy, calmer in real life, but definitely that guy, whereas Bob Newhart seems to be like, "Yeah, okay,
yeah,
whatever,
that's a show.
you go."
You just do Newhart and Rickles' relationship. There, you've got a show right there. But yeah, it wasn't amazing, amazing. But no, so I'm glad as I mentioned, probably in email or whatever, I read the book about, I read this book about 2 or 3 years ago, and had to go back. I do a book journal and kind of like, okay, oh
Yeah.
yeah, that's. I said that's still not enough. So I went and I rarely hang on to the books. I see all the books in your background. I have a lot of books, but they're books to be read. But at
Oh, these
my
aren't I think I've maybe read 10 of them. These are a lot of books I haven't read yet. Some of these are resource books, a few of them are just, like,
um,
memorabilia. I have, like, the Seinfeld cookbook behind me
yeah.
somewhere, which I'm not sitting down and reading a recipe for Kramer's casserole or whatever they came up with.
Yeah, I actually, speaking of recipes, I try to include a recipe in some of my books. I got a couple in Jack and Johnny actually, and just it's an homage to books that include recipes. I just oh yeah, that's kind of cool. I know
Yeah.
Adam Nadeff's Bill Cullen book has some recipes at the end. Well, that's I can do that, and
Yeah,
of course
he'll
I
be on the next episode of GFib, so yes.
yeah the uh, my recipes in Jack and Johnny that I'm looking at to the side, but I'll just hold it up here.
Yeah.
Okay, my recipes. Neither man has any recipes that they actually did or that I'm aware of. So I just made them up. Here's something that Jack might like to make,
Right.
and here's something to enjoy. And so I just I made them up with their actual recipes, but they're not something that they toiled in the kitchen, because
Right.
they enjoyed cooking. They- neither man was like that.
No.
Yeah. Well, we have somebody take care of that for us. We we can afford it.
Oh, yeah. Johnny, definitely.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's well, there is a story, you may have heard this too. The Johnny would go to Wolfgang Puck's restaurant
Yes.
on Friday nights and pick up uh, pizzas, unbaked pizzas, and he'd take them home and freeze them, and then he'd have them over the weekend. But he really liked the pizza there, and so he would go in and say, "Yeah, make me up this kind, make me up that kind." And from that experience, Wolfgang Puck introduced a line of frozen pizza. So Johnny had a little influence on how that started. I have yet to see a Wolfgang Puck frozen pizza in my freezer case, but that's the story. And I think Wolfgang Puck told him that story, told Mark Melkoff that story on the Carson podcast.
I don't think I've seen Wolfgang Puck anything in my supermarket.
Probably not. Yeah, I know it. It was
I remember seeing him on the Food Network when I was young, and then he didn't do that show anymore. And then he just sort of shows up, and occasionally you hear a guy with an Austrian accent, and they're, oh, Wolfgang Puck's on the Today Show again.
doing that. But yeah, but no, I'm glad that I had this chance to talk about the book and view it, read it again. So to finish the story that I couldn't, I had already donated the book at the time, so I didn't have it in my books.
Right.
So my library didn't have a copy, so I just went online and ordered a used copy to,
Oh, I
and
didn't know your library didn't have it.
I
Usually
check.
you
Yeah.
usually you grab them from the library.
Uh, Most of the books that I read, I actually have picked up at stores or
I
secondhand
mean,
store.
when we're like talking about a book you've already read, not
Yeah, yeah. No, I try to yeah, yeah. If that's this in this particular case, it just wasn't available, and I said, well, I'm really not going to go the Amazon route and buy a new book, but I really wanted the book itself to kind of
yeah.
some of the segments and be able to have this conversation with you.
I do want to say that this book is very similar to the Phil Rosenthal book, but I prefer Phil's book better. And part of that was Burroughs. There are a lot of just going into scenes. Like, I opened a random page and it's a scene from Cheers that has Cliff, Norm, and Carla. And because he directed so many classic shows, I'm like, I don't need you to tell me quote specific scenes because I've seen that scene already. You can just mention
Yeah,
what happened in the scene, or if you want to do it once or twice. But another one is Sam, Frasier, Monica, Rebecca. Again, Cheers, because Cheers is his biggest show in terms of involvement,
yeah,
where
yeah.
it's like it's a nice to have, and if I wasn't so familiar with all of those shows, I probably would be like, this is great. But as someone who is, I'm just like, just please stop. But I have to read it in case he gets something very like specific that is only in this scene where it's a nuance I may not remember otherwise, which never happened for me.
Good point. Phil gets more into what I would see as the mechanics of
Yes.
how we put a show on every week and how we kept the scripts fresh. And I love that we've talked about before how he had all the writers were expected to leave a script at the end of the season so they could start the next season with 4 or 5 decent workable ideas already in the hopper, and they weren't constantly chasing next week's episode and different things like that, and
Yeah.
working plus the insight on the stars and all of that. So yeah, it was a different style. And yeah, and I just yeah, I kind of looked at this differently because having some familiarity with his dad and the work that his dad did, um, it was more to me like how it, how a family influence can move on to the next generation, and so I found
Right.
that.
And I found that also, and nowadays, at least those the kids are like that person's a nepo baby, and sometimes it's like, yeah, that person can't act or they're horrible at their job, and other times it's like, okay, like, yes, they got a leg up because of who their parents were, who they know, but one, they wouldn't hang around if they were awful, and two, would we be saying the same thing if the kid decided to become a dentist because his dad was a dentist? Like, you hang around the office where your parents work sometimes, and you just pick things up, and you're exposed to it. And once you're exposed to something, if you like it, you're more likely to go into that industry.
Mhm. Yeah. Marlo Thomas told a great story in one of the discs from That Girl, some of the,
Yeah,
about how, you know, she, no question, she got her break because of who her dad was and
yeah,
all
Dan
that. But
Thomas.
they were when they were laying out this show, I mean, she had a lot of input as to how that Anne Marie character would be played, and she had to convince others that well, maybe we're not going to go down that same path as other shows about a single girl who's trying to make it in the big world, and so she had to advocate for what became That Girl. And it's interesting, you watch it and it's like, yeah, it does have a different feel for the time. And
Hmm.
while it was in that same era as some of the shows we talked about earlier, the
Yeah.
whole Petticoat Junction, Green Acres era, it was a different show for its time. And
Well, it was early 60s, that girl, wasn't it?
probably started probably around 64, 65, it ran like 4 or 5 seasons, five, I think 5 seasons. And I think that was the time frame around there.
Oh, yeah, it started in 66, I believe. Yeah, 1966 to 1971 on ABC.
Yeah, yeah. And
Okay, and Mary Tyler Moore is 1970 to 1977. That's where I got thrown off. Thought they both started 5 years earlier than they did.
yeah, yeah, and we go back to I think in Mary Tyler Moore's case, they set out to do something
You're breaking up.
really, and in that girl's case, it was um, you know I'm not touching anything, so hopefully it's coming through now. You
Yes.
broke up occasionally, but I just kind of listened and made up what I thought you were saying. some some of your
I think,
questions.
yeah, maybe the internet.
Yeah, yeah. So, good. Well, I think we're talked out as far as what I can tell you about this book, but
Yeah.
I'm to share any other insight if there's anything else that came across. I'm just looking at my notes while we were talking, and I think I've covered everything that I picked up because, as I mentioned, I kind of went through it and like, oh, gee, I'll make a note of this so I don't
Yeah.
forget to whatever. But it was a fun process to go back and read parts of it again for this podcast.
I'm glad, and thank you for coming back. It's always nice to have you on. We'll have to find something else to talk about. I don't know if it'll be another book, because those are a lot of work to track down and read, but we can definitely find a show. And is there anything else you want to say
No,
where we
it's
can
just
get Jack and Johnny?
Johnny is available on all the platforms, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's also on my publishing platform, lulu.com is where I usually do most of my business, but it's available there. It's being very well received. Again, the award from uh, Regal Summit was a nice plum, but it's been fun to just kind of talk about it. My latest project is a collection of holiday stories, which includes the It's a Wonderful Life Museum in Seneca Falls, New York.
Oh,
I was able to see that on my last visit to New York, and I said, "Well, maybe, in this, I knew I was going to do a holiday collection, and I had several stories and reflections already, and I said, well, maybe there's something I can do with this." So I was just there to see it, and then I said, okay, I can develop some thoughts around that, and so that's included in this, and that's actually off to the publishers right now to kind of, how this works. In my case, I'll get a preview copy that I'll
yes.
mark up, and then we'll send it back out and certainly have it available. I'm doing an authors fair locally next month, so my goal is to have that ready and available at the authors fair, and then it'll, of course, it'll be on the websites and everything
Yeah.
as well. But the museum itself is fascinating. Just lots of
I didn't know
icons.
there was one.
Well, the community of if we're running late,
No, we're fine.
I'll just briefly. The movie "It's a Wonderful Life" is based on a fictional town called Bedford Falls.
Yes.
We found out long after the movie was made that Frank Capra, the director, was inspired in part by an actual incident in Seneca Falls, New York, where a man jumps into the river to save a person who had tried to commit suicide.
Okay.
And several of the aspects of the community of Bedford Falls were very similar to real things in this community of Seneca Falls.
Yeah.
And through research and all of this other people, not me, they found that he had visited that community a number of times. He had talked to people, um, and he did indeed use Seneca Falls as the inspiration of that part of the story, the jumping into the cold, icy waters and trying to save someone's life and all that.
Hmm.
The other part of the story about who the character was and how he touched so many lives. That's a separate story.
Yes.
And what Capra was able to do is merge those two and create the movie. The community of Seneca Falls decided, well, maybe, since we have a lot of interest in this, tourists would come through and say,
Oh, yeah.
"Yeah, where's that bridge, or whatever." So they put together this little museum, and that was about 20 years ago. And then they had to move out of the original location. They're into a little storefront thing now, but they're moving back to this larger location, which is a converted movie theater,
Oh.
sometime next year. Um, but what I saw were, still photographs, production sheets, call sheets for days of shooting. Um, they have two or three actual pieces of scenery or things that were used in the movie.
Oh, wow.
Not scenery so much as costumes, that kind of thing, and
Yeah.
just a lot of um, what's a duplicate basically of different
Reproduction.
productions, yes, of different things that were used in the movie. And it was just, for me, it was like 2 hours of, like, kind of, I loved being there, and I thought, okay, maybe we can develop something there, and so we're kind of building the book around that story, and then including all of these other uh, stories, some true stories, some fiction, just kind of put it
Hmm.
all in a book. And I've been wanting to do a Christmas book for quite a while, and so this is what's going to happen in the next couple months.
And it'll come out just in time for Christmas.
Time for holiday gift giving, yes.
So keep us posted on that. I'm sure we'll have you back before
Well, yes,
December.
I'm sure we'll have something to talk about. Yes, um, that's a fun process to go through, especially when it's something that is um, that I enjoy doing. And the movie "It's a Wonderful Life" is one of my favorites, so it was nice to be able to really do. And now I live in California, so the
Yes.
this museum's been around for 20 years, and every year I'd go back to visit my family there. My dad is still with us, and he just didn't have time. It was like week goes by, time to fly back, and
Yeah.
so there just happened to be a day part, really, a morning and an early afternoon. I said, I think I can do this. Went out there and really, I'm so glad I was able to do that.
Nice. I'm glad you were able to. And it sounds like the book's going to be perfect for
I
some
hope so.
holiday cheer.
Yes, yes.
And thank you again, Steve, for coming on. Until next time, I'm Allison Lips. This has been Greetings from the Idiot Box. Remember, television is a medium, neither rare nor well done. Bye.